Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to get started in just a moment. I just want to make sure I'm admitting everyone from the waiting room before I completely start, which I see people are flooding in now. Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Kluberdans, the Continuing Education and Emerging Technologies Librarian for the Central New York Library Resources Council. My pronouns are she, her. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, After Emergency Response Mode, Approaching Virtual Storytimes with Intention. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of some housekeeping. You may have noticed that you were muted upon entering this meeting. We would prefer you to stay muted throughout, so please use the chat to introduce yourself and offer any comments or questions. We also ask that you keep your camera off to minimize distractions for the other attendees. Our presenter will be offering you the chance to unmute or turn on your camera during specific times. Our presenter will be taking questions throughout the webinar, so feel free to add them to the chat when they arise. We also ask that you put a capital letter Q at the beginning of your question so they don't get lost. Live closed captioning is available for this webinar. To view the live captions, click on the closed caption icon toward the bottom center of your screen and click Show Subtitle. All attendees are expected to follow CLRC's Code of Conduct, which will be added to the chat shortly. To summarize, please treat all CLRC staff, event attendees, and speakers with respect. Those who are not adhering to the Code of Conduct will be removed from the webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be shared in the next few days. The email containing the link will also provide information about getting a certificate of attendance, as well as a copy of the presentation shown today. If you're interested in more events from both CLRC and other ESLN councils, please visit CLRC's event listing page. The link will be added to the chat. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Jessica Fredrickson, the Training and Advocacy Chair for Colorado Libraries for Early Literacy.
Hi, everyone. All right, this is Jessica speaking now, and pretty sure my screen share is working, but please do leave a comment in the chat if it is not working, and please do continue to introduce yourselves. I wanted to start by sharing what to expect today. So after reviewing the norms for our time together and introducing myself a little bit, we're going to pause and reflect on our virtual storytime practice. We're going to center ourselves in the why we do virtual storytime. And after we center ourselves in that why, we're going to brainstorm together and try to answer the question that Rebecca posed to me when she first approached me about this opportunity, which is how do we make virtual story times better? Again, some of this Rebecca already went over, but we have 1 hour together today. Please keep cameras and microphones turned off until designated opportunities to turn them on. Those optional opportunities for interaction will include the chat box. If you're more comfortable unmuting and speaking, we'll have some time for that as well, and contributing to a collaborative Google Jamboard. If you would like to unmute and speak during those opportunities, please just raise your hand in Zoom, and that way we can ensure that one person is speaking at a time. Please use the chat for questions throughout the session and designate your questions with a capital Q. That will help Rebecca and I keep track of them. Lastly, and most importantly, please take care of yourself. Please fidget, doodle, knit, manage any children you have learning remotely. The training will be recorded and available for later viewing. So please don't worry about forgetting something or missing anything. Please take care of yourself today. My name is Jessica Fredrickson again, and thank you, Rebecca, for inviting me to be here today. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you for filling out the survey ahead of time. That really helped me plan for today and try to plan a time that is going to be useful for you. I will be giving a brief visual description of myself. I am a white 32-year-old woman. My hair is much longer than in the picture on the slide. I have pandemic hair, major pandemic hair going on. I was a teacher prior to becoming a youth services librarian. I am also one of the 26% of adults in the United States who is disabled. I bring that up because there is no library staff or library community or library story time without disabilities present. And my experience with disability really impacts what I consider best practices for my story time and the things that I advocate for. I'm here today in my role as the Training and Advocacy Chair for Colorado Libraries for Early Literacy, which is a local Colorado organization dedicated to strengthening children's literacy through library services and community advocacy. We're most well known for an annual conference every year and our CLEL Book Awards, which are awarded annually to the best books that model those early literacy skills and practices for caregivers. And we just announced our 2021 Bell Awards, so encourage everyone to check those out. We also recently partnered with the Association for Library Service to Children on the Virtual Storytime Services Guide. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about the structure of the guide because it's a really robust resource that I encourage you to explore after our time together today. I know a lot of people said, I need resources. This is a great resource for you. It sounded like from the survey that most people in our audience are storytime providers, but we also have some supervisors present and people who are involved with editing a virtual storytime video or marketing a virtual storytime video. And then we have some people who do everything. Wow, you must be tired. We wrote the guide with all of those different roles in mind. So there are 8 different sections, starting with the introduction, going into copyright. There's a section on promotions, a section on serving diverse children and families, which includes information about reaching across the digital divide. There's a section on suggested or best practices, technology tools, external resources to support early literacy, and then other virtual children's program ideas. Each section, except for the introduction, starts with targeted suggestions and valuable information for people in those different roles. So even though most of the content in suggested practices is going to be geared towards storytime providers, there are still things that supervisors and marketing or communication departments can do to enhance the virtual storytime experience. And there's still stuff that they need to know. And that's on the very top. So almost 90% of the people who responded to the survey said that they were interested in suggested or best practices. And that's where we're going to spend the most time talking about today. Uh, this is this is a really hard question to answer because so much of best practice is determined on local factors, right? That's rooted in your community, in your library's budget, in your staff capacity. If you are one person who is in charge of the entire virtual storytime process from production at the beginning to promotion at the end, it's not going to be best practice to try and do everything we talk about today and then burn yourself out. So, again, best practice is going to look different depending on each library. Best practice for a rural library in southern Colorado, where most of the community does not have access to high speed internet. Um, their best practice is going to look very different than like best practice at my library, which is located in the Denver metro area, which is not to say that digital inequities don't exist in cities because they certainly do, um, but rather to say that your best practice should be grounded in the needs of your community. Best practice should also be informed by our goals for virtual story time. And so for many of us, when I asked us to think about this question, why do we do virtual story times? Our first reason why came from a very negative place. We're doing this because we can't do story times in person. We can't do quote unquote normal story times. And that was a very valid and true reason to switch to virtual programs, but it's not a very robust reason. Because we can't do something else is not firm ground to guide your practice in as a story time provider. It doesn't give us an outcome to measure besides view counts on the video. And it doesn't really inspire us and give us that spark and help us stay peppy in front of the camera. Self-named questionologist Warren Berger talks a lot about the importance of starting with why. Why is the first and most important stage of inquiry? It's also not a very popular question in bureaucracies like education or libraries. Raise your hand if you have ever tried to ask about why do we do summer reading the way that we do. But when you pause and you ask why, you open your mind to new possibilities. There's an image of Warren Berger's first book on the slide. It's called A More Beautiful Question. There's also a link on the slide to just a shorter 9-minute article that gives a great overview of the why, what, if, how process, if you are interested in learning more about that. I'd like us to start today with why. And so Rebecca's going to help me by putting a link in the chat to a Jamboard. When Rebecca approached me about this opportunity and shared that she had received requests for how to make virtual story times better, I kept thinking about how we can't answer that question until we step back in the problem-solving creativity process and ask ourselves why. And I would like to invite everyone to contribute to a Google Jamboard and share your why. And I'm going to share a different screen here. This should be what you see right now. Jamboard is an interactive online whiteboard. You can add text, you can add a sticky note.
Jessica, we're still seeing your presentation. So
You're still seeing my presentation.
May need to stop sharing and then share again.
And share again. All right, I'm going to share a different screen again.
There you go.
All right. Aha, some people are in here already. So like I like to add sticky notes. You know, why do I do story time? And one big reason why I do story time is because relationships matter. And you can drag your sticky notes. You can make them bigger. You can add text. You can draw pictures. But I would just like everyone to share that why. And if you feel more comfortable unmuting and verbally sharing your why, and that's how you'd want to participate, that's okay as well. You can raise your hand. Lastly, please keep that Google Jamboard open because we're going to return to it several times today. I noticed on the survey that 2 respondents have been doing virtual story times for more than a year. So since before COVID. I'm really hoping that those respondents are here with us today and can maybe talk more about their why. And I'm going to share that Jamboard again. Well, yeah, we're doing online story time because kids love books. Yes, sharing the love of books and raising readers. That reason did not go away because of COVID, right? Story time is still very important. We're doing online story time so we can reach a wider audience than in person. Absolutely. There are a lot of people who never were able to come to story time at the library and who are just being exposed to us and learning so many things about us. Reaching the community so they know we're here. Because we miss the children and they miss us. Absolutely. Yeah, maintaining those relationships is so important. Keeping the excitement and the love of reading because it's expected. Yes, it's true. Virtual programs are becoming an expectation. Other duties as assigned, right? Thank you for sharing, everyone. Kids need routines. Yes, routines help us manage change. Even during the best of times, routines and consistency are so important for young children. And virtual storytime is a way to help families do that. These are great reasons. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. Please do keep adding to that board, language development in the chat. And I'm going to share. Oops, our presentation again. Oops. So I would like to share some of my whys with you and explain how those guide my decisions and my best practice as a storytime provider. One of the most compelling reasons for me to pivot to virtual programs during COVID-19 was to maintain those relationships with our patrons, right? Relationships reduce toxic stress even during the best of times. And 2020 and now 2021 are far from the best of times. So for me, this means continuing to meet with the groups that I was seeing outside of the libraries for outreach, like my school visits, right? And it means that I structure our time together so that there are opportunities for live interaction and connection. I build in time for students to just talk to me about whatever they want to talk to me about and share whatever they want to share with me. It also means that I share ownership and I invite my students to pass along their suggestions for books they want to read or songs they want to sing in the next story time when I come visit. It means that I ask my groups for feedback. I ask my teachers how it went. I ask for immediate feedback, like what book did you like the most today? Why? Because part of a relationship means active listening, right? These relationships are so powerful. And not just the old relationships that we're maintaining, but also the new relationships that we're building. For example, my teammate and I do sensory story times for a transition program for young adults with disabilities in partnership with our local school district. This program began as physical outreach in 2019 and then transitioned to a virtual sensory story time in 2020. And there's a screenshot on the program of my Tina, Miss Teammate, on the side with some giant teeth. And then the kids in the class, when they were remote learning, they were all tuning in from laptops at home, and now they're back in the classroom and watching us on the smart board. So last fall, we only had 3 returning students whom we had ever met face to face. The majority of students in the class are students that we have met virtually. But we have bonded so much as a group that um, there was one morning we were scheduled for story time, and that morning the teachers and the students found out that one of their classmates had died. I offered to cancel, story time that morning out of respect for their loss, but they all wanted to see us and they wanted us to come and do story time and they wanted to be together with us and talk with us. Um, I share that story because I don't want you to doubt for a moment the impact that you're making and the lives that you're influencing when you're forming relationships, even through the screen, right? I don't want you to value those virtual connections any less than the ones that you do in person. They matter, and they are having an impact. So, if building and maintaining relationships is a big part of your why, here are some other what ifs we might explore. What if we advertise who our virtual story times will be with so that families know when to tune in and watch their favorite faces? What if we consistently schedule storytime providers to a specific live storytime day or time so that they can bond with their groups and build relationships? What if we make virtual storytime videos available for on-demand viewing so that families can see their favorite faces over and over again? What if we ask our families for feedback and find out what they want and need? I really, really want to emphasize that last point. Nothing about us without us is a well known saying in the disability community. This saying really captures the idea that no policy or program should be decided without representation and participation from the groups who will be impacted. So I really encourage everyone today to go back to your libraries and advocate for a survey, for maybe a virtual program caregiver uh, group, advisory group, and just advocate for seeking feedback from the people who know best how you can serve them better. What what else? I would love to hear from everyone and gather our collective wisdom. If relationship is building is a big part of your why at the library, please do head to that second or third page on the Google Jamboard, which I will share again. Whoop. And add your thoughts here to why do we build relationships? What if we do this in our virtual story times to help build relationships? What are some things that you do? And again, if you would prefer to unmute and speak verbally, that is possible too. Please just raise your hand. Oh, what if we mention kids by name? Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit later about best practices um, from 0 to 3 about screen time. And one of the things that they suggest in screen time with young children is using names. Incorporating time to speak in their native language. Thanks, Rebecca, for putting the Jamboard again, too. I like to do the Jamboard because then we can share the Jamboard after the presentation and you can see what everybody has said. It's a little easier than navigating a shared record of the chat. Oh, I love this idea, inviting children to a show and tell, share a talent. I recently watched a virtual story time with Arapaho Libraries. I don't work there. I used to work there. So I love to watch my friends, and they saved at the end of story time. They set aside time for all the kids in the program to come share the book that they're reading right now or a book that they like. And two children had the same book and freaked out when they saw they had the same book. It was very cool. Sending craft kits home so we can do crafts together. Oh, some people are opening the session a few minutes early to have time to chat with the kids before the program formally begins. Yeah. Setting that time to build relationships. Asking kids what kind of programs they want to see. I think that's great. I once took a webinar with ALSC that suggested that children are underserved in libraries, of which at first sounds weird because we do so much children's programming. But when you look at the definition of an underserved or marginalized population, one of the big components of that is not being listened to, not being asked things. And how often do we ask kids what they want and what they need? And how often do we just approach them with our assumptions, right? These are great. Thank you, everyone, so much for contributing to that and sharing your brainstorming. I appreciate getting ideas to take back into my practice as well. Thank you. All right, it looks like the sticky notes are starting to come in slower, so I'm going to move on. But again, please keep adding to that Jamboard. So I mentioned in my introduction that my lived experience with disability significantly impacts how I approach virtual story times and the things that I advocate for, namely accessibility. Accessibility is really important to me because there is no community and no storytime audience without disabilities, whether or not we know it. Accessibility is important because virtual and web accessibility is a legal right. Just like people don't have to request a ramp to enter your building 2 weeks ahead of time, they shouldn't have to request an accessible virtual experience. The last thing I like to emphasize is that everyone benefits when accessibility is built in. And that's a huge selling point if you're trying to get support from other departments, because a lot of what makes an experience accessible is maybe outside of your hands as a virtual storytime provider. But there's still things you can do, and we mostly have storytime providers in our audience, so that's what I'm going to focus on. Some of the things that I do to make an accessible virtual story time is I create a welcoming environment. I do that by reducing background noise and visual busyness. I wear a microphone and I ensure that one person speaks at a time, just like we talked about today. That helps everyone hear better and be able to focus more and get the most out of the experience, right? Not just people who may be hard of hearing and need better audio quality. I slow down for the screen. I slow down in my speech and in my motions. I count in my head. I will ask a question and then I will be quiet and I'll smile at the camera and I might cup my ear and then I count for 10 in my head. All young children need wait time to answer questions, right? That is just a thing. But then you throw in a screen and it adds a whole nother layer for your brain to process and think through before you can actually hear and think about responding to what was said. So, slowing down is beneficial for everyone, right? Not just for people who might have cognitive difficulties. I provide multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression during story time. So, for example, I adapt songs and rhymes for various levels of motor skills. And this is beneficial not just for individuals who may have fine motor difficulties, but also beneficial for the wide range of storytime ages that we have at home right now. Um, I know from watching my story times, I have older siblings, I have younger siblings, sometimes I have whole families watching. So adapting those songs and rhymes is really beneficial for all the different ages tuning in. Uh, I build in audio descriptions for visuals, like I described myself to you today and my picture on the screen. I'm about to describe this flannel, and I give verbal directions for activities. So building in verbal directions for activities ahead of time just reduces everybody's anxiety and it helps everyone participate better because they know what's expected, right? I use variety besides color in my flannels. This allows not just individuals with color blindness to participate, but it also expands everyone's vocabulary and builds their background knowledge. It's just a better experience for everybody. So there's a picture on the slide right now of my modified mouse house flannel, which traditionally, if you're familiar with that flannel, there's just houses of different colors. But my flannel has houses of different types. So I have a trailer house, and I have a lighthouse, a barn house, a firehouse, a birdhouse, a log cabin house. And if you click on the flannel, it will take you to a YouTube video where I demo that in Storytime action. We're not going to watch that today, but if you would like to see how I use it in Storytime, um, you could do that after the presentation. So, if accessibility is also a big part of your why, then here are some more possibilities we might explore. What if we make virtual story times available for on demand viewing so that all families can engage with our content on their own time and schedule? It's important to note that there is a large number of people for whom storytime at the library is always inaccessible, even during quote unquote normal times. That may be due to transportation barriers. That may be because the caregivers are working during story time hours, especially if those hours are in the morning. That and nighttime might be, for homework and bath, and there's no time to go to the library. Maybe your library requires registration and they can't ever get in. Or maybe your library doesn't require registration. And then story time is really full and crowded and overwhelming if a child has a sensory processing disorder. What if we ensured accurate captioning so that all caregivers are better able to participate in the experience and retain those early literacy messages that they see and hear? Although most of the children in our Storytime audience are not reading yet, the captions are not for them. The captions are for the caregivers. One of the things I love about Every Child Ready to Read is the emphasis on children and adults as equally important audiences in Storytime, right? So, caption videos help caregivers just retain the information. We said building a love of books and raising readers is important to us. Then we want to make sure caregivers hear those messages and understand them. Caption videos can also increase your video's discoverability on the web. It increases your search engine optimization. So, for those of you who are wondering about marketing, that's a way you can make your content more discoverable out there. What if we provide tactile experiences like sensory bags or storytime at home kits to go with virtual storytime so that all families are able to engage in the experience through multiple modalities? That's something that I do for my virtual sensory storytime outreach. I prep individual sensory bags ahead of time and drop them off for the classroom. What if we simplified the path to engagement with our content? You know, how discoverable are our virtual story times? How many clicks and how many steps do families have to take to actually get there? Less clicks is beneficial, not just for individuals with limited fine motor control, but also for parents who are bouncing toddlers on their lap, and toddlers like to push buttons, and then all of a sudden the story time is gone. How easy is it to get back into the story time, right? What if we reached out to families across the digital divide with phone a story or radio story times? What what if? What else? And again, I would like to invite us to answer this question on the Google Jamboard, which you can reach by clicking the arrow on the top. There should say accessibility. What if we? And I'm going to share that board so that we can see what everybody is saying. What if we show the question, add the question to screen so parents and children can pause the video and have a discussion? Oh, I love that idea. What if we use breakout rooms in Zoom to form smaller discussion groups? Awesome. And if you feel more comfortable unmuting and speaking and would like to share that way, please raise your hand so Rebecca can give you a chance to speak. What if we had a visual of what's coming up in Storytime? Absolutely.
Jessica, it looks like your microphone just stopped working. It sounds like. Still not working. I still don't hear you. I think I see you trying something out.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I think my lapel microphone died. And I charged it beforehand too. So maybe I won't be recommending this microphone when we talk about technology. I just switched to the microphone on my laptop. Let me get back into that Google Jamboard and see what people are saying. Incorporating ASL during story time. So that is interesting. And I'm gonna pause here and talk about that a little bit. There was a big discussion on library Twitter this summer about whether or not that is respectful representation in story time. I am not deaf. I do not speak ASL myself. And even if I was deaf, I would be one person and not representing the entire community. But I will share some things that I heard from that community. And it was that, you know, while they appreciate that the intention for that is maybe good, the impact is maybe not so great, especially if it's someone like me who does not speak ASL, who is not fluent in ASL, incorporating that during story time. And so I would encourage us to ask ourselves, you know, how accessible is our story time? Are we offering captions? Can families request a sign language interpreter? Is that request the ability to request that advertised with every virtual story time? Or are we just offering this like nod to, hey, here, you know, sprinkling in here's some ASL? Yeah, and so I also would encourage people not to use baby signs. Baby signs are not ASL, and a lot of people in the deaf community find that offensive. And the other thing I would encourage people to do is to not, if you are incorporating ASL in your story times, to not speak the words at the same time. So something a lot of people don't realize about ASL is that The facial expressions are every bit as important as how your hands are speaking. Those work together. And so if you are singing and signing at the same time, that's not really ASL. And that's not how ASL is taught. You can take ASL classes for free through Gaudelet University. You can sign up. I'm going through those myself right now. And when you are learning ASL, the instructor does not say something at the same time as they're signing. Those are separate. So I just want to thank you for the person who put that on there. I'm glad we could have that conversation. These are great ideas here. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. And I'm going to have us move on to our next slide, which is providing high quality screen time. So some people on the survey mentioned that they felt hesitant to add more screen time to a child's plate. This is why I personally ground my practice in the E-AIMS model from 0 to 3, right? I want to make sure that my story time is providing the type of connective and constructive experience that the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends for young children. And that E-AIMS acronym stands for engaging, actively involved, meaningful, and social. So engaging, if I'm doing story time with a closed group, like with my virtual sensory story time with the local public school, I use names. That's appropriate. If my group is open to the public, I don't use names out of respect for children's and families' privacy. But I do try to channel my inner Mr. Rogers, and I look at the camera and I just try to convey to each child that I care about them, and I'm so glad that they are there. When I'm thinking about how do I make my story times actively involved, I ask questions. I encourage children to make connections, and then I build in that wait time that we talked about being so important. This is possible with both a live performance and a pre-recorded performance. It's possible with an open group or a closed group. Just kind of depends on your setting, but there are ways that you can do that, whatever your filming environment is. I try to make my story times meaningful by choosing developmentally appropriate content that kids can relate to and easily connect with. So I'm not reading about outer space with babies because they have no background knowledge and no way to really connect with that. I try to make my virtual story time social and encourage interaction with caregivers. That really is the crux of a high quality screen time experience, is if you're encouraging that shared parent-child use. So for example, my story times at my library, generally speaking, are open to the public. There's a public link on the website. It goes to a Zoom. There's not a lot of filtering there to monitor who's coming in to that story time space. So because of that, we do not have chat enabled with everyone. Chat is only enabled with the host, but I still use the chat box. So I ask caregivers to talk with their kids about a question, and we pause and we let them type. And then I ask my Storytime co-host to relate to me, what are people saying? What do people think? And so we still build in that interaction. So if you're looking for additional best practices to ground your Storytime in, besides what we already know about best practices for early literacy story times, you might think about, what if we build interaction into live story time? What does that look like? And I know everybody right now is thinking about, well, how do we do that? Which platform should we use? How do we do that with privacy? How do we do that with copyright? But before we jump into that detailed how, I want us to just imagine the possibilities. What if we build interaction into pre-recorded virtual story times? That probably looks more like Dora the Explorer or Blue's Clues or Daniel Tiger, to use a more recent figure. What if we offered age-specific virtual story times so that children interact with developmentally appropriate content? I'm taking a Babies in the Libraries class through UW-Madison right now, And it's just reminding me how unique every age and stage is. That's why, we typically have baby and toddler and preschool story time separate at the library, because they're very unique times of life. One of my CLEL colleagues, Julie Crabb, she does an amazing virtual baby dance program for families and babies. And that's something I'm hoping that I can borrow and get going at my library. What if we read diverse books so that all children see themselves meaningfully represented and valued in our virtual story times? And we emphasize this point a lot in the virtual storytime guide. And children have been exposed to a tremendous amount of both firsthand and secondary racism during the pandemic. Think about what they see when their grown-ups are watching TV and the news is on. Imagine being an Asian American family and seeing one of the most important people in the country consistently call it the Chinese virus, right? So we have the opportunity during our screen time to say to diverse children and families, we see you and we value you and you matter, right? We can do that with our book choices during screen time. What if we offer extension activities that children and caregivers can enjoy together after story time, right? Encouraging that social experience and extending the story time experience so that children and caregivers can interact with each other. What else? Let's return to our Jamboard for the last time and brainstorm together how else we might offer that high quality screen time experience. Keeping in mind, that a high quality screen time experience is engaging, it's actively involved, it's meaningful. How might we do that? Thanks, Rebecca, for dropping in that link again. Oh, and I saw in the chat under the accessibility, using simple materials that families have at home to make them feel more comfortable. Absolutely. I think that is excellent. And also maybe avoiding materials like food, right? Because food scarcity is a thing. And so, kids who can't grab a box of pasta and shake it, what can we suggest that families shake with at home instead of pasta? So that way everybody can participate. High quality screen times. What if we promote good quality online resources to parents? Absolutely. What if we connect to themes or timely topics? Yes, right? Sharing content that is relevant to kids. Talking about snow if it's snowing outside. What else might we do to make an engaging, actively involved, meaningful, and social experience? Sharing tips on how to minimize screen time, what to try instead. And I think offering like an extension activity away from screen time after virtual story time is the way that we can subtly encourage caregivers to now, take this thing and, go do something with it away from the screen. Offering times to pause and comment or chat. Ooh, encouraging family and siblings to stay too. Yes, that's why I love telling my grown-ups, don't go away. We're going to need you to type answers in the chat box, because it encourages them to stay in front of the screen instead of plopping their kids down and walking away, which no judgment. If you have had to do that, if any caregivers have had to do that, I know that sometimes adults need to shower. And my story time might be the only time that they have to go shower, so that's okay too. All right. Showing how to modify or replicate something from story time to do again after the screen is off. Absolutely, right? The repetition in story time is going to help families do these things off the screen as well. Great point. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your collective wisdom and brainstorming with us today. All right. We're going to move on to the last step, which is how. And as the saying goes, the devil is in the details. And that's why how comes last, because it's really easy to get stuck in that and lose sight of the things that matter to you. So knowing your why is really important before you go into the how phase, because that's going to help you figure out what's most important as you weigh a lot of conflicting factors and decide how you're going to accomplish your goals for virtual storytime. So, for example, of how complicated the how can be. It made sense to a lot of us last year to simplify the path to engagement by going to social media, right? And doing story times maybe through Facebook Live, because that's where our families already are, and it just makes sense. But although the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act does not apply to libraries, it does apply to the third-party vendors and platforms that we use. So providing virtual story time to children through social media, which makes its bread and butter through selling personally identifiable information, is questionable. It's probably more appropriate to promote rather than provide virtual story times through social media, with the possible exception of YouTube, which had a very big lawsuit that I think was settled in 2019. And they made a lot of changes to YouTube because of that lawsuit, because it was in violation with the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And so now on YouTube, you can designate your content as made for children, and then it's more protected. Another conflict to navigate is the balance between copyright and accessibility. We had a lot of people curious and wanting to know more about copyright in the survey. I am not a lawyer. I'm sure you've heard this in a lot of presentations. I cannot offer you legal advice. So that there's this tension between accessibility and the ability to self-pace a video experience, to be able to pause it, to be able to tune in whenever, to start and stop it. That is a must for an accessible video. And like we've talked about, a lot of our families could really appreciate that and use that, that on-demand content. But publishers don't like it when copyrighted materials exist outside of a one-time live performance without special permission from them, which maybe we need to ask for that special permission, maybe not. It depends on how you interpret fair use at your library. Rebecca's gonna drop a link in the chat box to a blog post that I wrote after one of the first webinars that CLEL presented about virtual story times, and just share kind of my more in-depth take on some of the most frequently asked questions we get. A lot of those questions are about accessibility and copyright and things like that. One thing I try to emphasize over and over again whenever I talk with people is that there's no one perfect virtual platform, and there's no one perfect way to do virtual story time. The answers to your questions and your hows are really going to depend on your library and your community and your budget and your staff capacity. So there were a lot of these micro level how-to questions in the survey. And I just want to encourage everyone again to bookmark the Virtual Storytime Services Guide, which includes more than 200 pages of resources and information and more context that is going to help you answer those specific questions. Like, what is a good microphone that won't break the bank? So I was going to recommend my lapel microphone here, which has never failed me, actually. I'm shocked. I've used this for virtual story times for months. It's only $35 on Amazon. It's great. I'll share the link to that in the chat when we're in the question and opinion part of our presentation today. But someone asked on the survey about how do I model full body action songs and rhymes on Zoom? And I think a lapel microphone is a must for that, right? Because you're sitting closer to the screen to read a book, and then you're going to need to back away from the screen to fit your whole body in the frame when you're modeling that action song and rhyme. And if you're relying on the internal microphone in a laptop, it's going to have a hard time hearing you from the back. So definitely get a lapel microphone. With all of that being said, I do want to honor your questions and try to gather, our collective wisdom to answer them while we're together. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and look at the chat. Rebecca, did anyone share a question in the chat that I missed?
I didn't see anything, so feel free to start adding them now. As a reminder, just put a link to the guide she just mentioned. Give me a moment. I will find that.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah, link to the Virtual Storytime Services guide. I have tried to answer a lot of the frequently asked questions throughout the presentation, but if you have another question, I like to say I have an opinion. I don't know anyone who has all of the answers right now, but please do share your questions in the chat. Jessica says for pre-filmed, pre-recorded videos you're editing, I filmed myself from 2 different angles singing a version of Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes. Absolutely, yeah. If you're going to pre-record story times, that gives you a lot of flexibility there with what you can do. Ashley asks, any recommendations on getting the word out about these programs? It's been disheartening to even have virtual story time since we get so few folks and the parents normally aren't there. I feel so there's a couple things you can do. One thing that really helped us get our virtual story times going, I would say we have regularly between 70 to 150 people tuning in every morning, less for the evening story times. But we got our story times on the Macaroni Kid calendar. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Macaroni Kid. I believe they're in a lot of states. I'm not sure if they're in New York, but they do a lot of, they engage with parents, they promote a lot of different programs. And so they promoted our programs on social media and on their activity calendar, and we got a lot of traffic from that. So I would look for partners to help you promote. Maybe it's putting flyers out at different places in your community, sending flyers to your local preschools, right? And go home in a Friday folder if your preschools are open. I also feel like word of mouth from other families is really effective. So we have been doing some take and make bags at our library, and we had one of our patrons helpfully advertised for us on Nextdoor and said, "Oh, look at this great thing that I just got at my library." And we had 200 bags. They were gone in less than a weekend, and I've had about 6 people an hour ask me. When I've worked at the desk for the past 2 days, I've had like 6 people an hour come in and ask, "Hey, I saw this on Nextdoor. Where is this?" I work in a community where there's a lot of access to technology. So your promotions and marketing strategy might be different depending on your community. I've heard of libraries advertise on radios, local radio news stations. I've heard libraries get commercials onto their local PBS channel. But we've definitely had word of mouth. Really, just our patrons are our best promoters. How do I hold the book so that I can see the words and kids can see the pictures? Jane, I'll share kind of what I do. I read a lot of short books in story time that I can memorize before I share them on the camera. And then I rely on higher level questions to engage kind of my older kids in the audience, right? I rely on those higher order thinking questions because maybe the text is simple. I've seen when I went to the Arapahoe Library story time, my friend Mary read an ebook while she was doing that story time. So she had pulled up a picture book ebook. She shared her screen. That way everybody could see the text and really see the pictures really well. I think that is a great idea. Other people are weighing in on the promotions, saying leave flyers and laundromats, grocery stores, churches and playgrounds, absolutely. look for those regional moms and parents group. Absolutely. Look for those local connections. Any other questions?
And feel free if you'd like, you can, if you'd rather not add in the chat and you want to unmute yourself, you should have the power to do so if you'd like to ask a question out loud. Okay.
Well, I'm thankful for everyone for coming today. I think this was, maybe this was more interactive than what you were expecting. I know I asked a lot. I asked a lot for a lot of brain power this afternoon. And so thank you for lending, your energy to this time and sharing your wisdom with all of us. Oh, thank you, Heather. Yeah, no, and I think, Heather, there are ways to respectfully incorporate ASL into Storytime, and there are ways to not do that. And how that lands is really going to depend on which member of the deaf and hard of hearing community, that you're speaking to. It lands differently on every individual. And I would just encourage everyone who wants to incorporate ASL into Storytime to also look at how else, is your library accessible? Is that nod to ASL the only time that deaf people see themselves meaningfully represented? How does your library have an accessibility policy? Is there a way to for families to request ASL interpretation for virtual programs? Oh, thank you, everyone. I'm going to share the screen with my contact slide. So I'm always happy to chat and continue the conversation outside of our short 1 hour time window today. Virtual story times are big, and I didn't realize how big they were going to be until I got put in charge of the project with ALSC. And then there were like 50 of us meeting together every week, putting in so many hours, trying to figure it all out. And then everything would change week by week as we learned more information. And that the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act was a big one, that after someone from ALA was like, hey, you need to think about this. And we were like, oh no, we just wanted to tell people to do Facebook because that's where everybody is. So my email address is jfred88x@gmail.com. And thank you again for coming today. I'm going to
Thank you. I'm going to put that in the chat. Awesome.
Put my email address in the chat box too.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And I'm just gonna, I know some people came in late and I hope they're still here, but I'll just repeat that tomorrow or Monday, or actually I'm gonna fix the captioning on this webinar, and that always takes me a very long time. But in the next few days, I'll be sending around an email with a link to the recording, a copy of the presentation, and I'll send some of the links that Jessica had sent me previously to, just to make sure that you have access to those. But thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, Jessica, for coming and doing this for us. Again, this was something that our members specifically requested because it's not going away anytime soon. So knowing best practices is always important.
And then we'll have to start thinking about like best practices when we come back, right? One of my friends was talking to me about how when we come back to in-person story time, there's going to be a whole generation of children who have never had a large group social experience and will have no context for that and like no self-regulation. And I was like, I am not ready to think about that right now.
Oh my, that's next year's problem, I think.
Let me share that contact information again.
I'll have to keep that in mind for a future training. Maybe I'll bug you again. If you
my God. I am not ready to think about that.
I understand.
Thank you for having me, Rebecca. Thank you everyone for your time filling out that survey. I hope that you will fill out the survey that Rebecca is going to send out. Like I talked about, that active listening is important, and I want to listen to you, and I want to learn and grow as a presenter. So please do, share your feedback with me and Rebecca.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you again. And thanks everyone. I know it's Thursday, but I'll say preemptively, enjoy your weekend, please. And I think Jessica mentioned this at the beginning of her webinar, but most importantly, please take care of yourselves. This is a hard time, and February has just been a rough month for a month that is so short. So take care of yourself. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great one.
Thanks, Rebecca.